Hey guys, this is Stonebank and welcome to episode 5 of Studio Sessions. And this episode we're going to cover kicks. Well, mainly kicks, like the components of a kick and how they work and why they work and how we can sort of make them from scratch. And then also as a little bonus, I'll sort of show you how I'm sort of gelling my kick and basses together using a certain plugin or synth. So yeah, it's going to be a good episode and I think a lot of people will learn a lot from this, hopefully anyway. So, a kick drum. We have here one of my bodged examples of a kick, and I've divided it into 3 little sections. So, fundamentally, we have the kick, which is like the transient, the punch, and then the tail. So, those sort of 3 things. And if we sort of dissect it through, like this point here, we have the transient, and I'd say like this part here will be like our punch, sort of around like your 100 hertz, 150. And then we have our tail, which is usually then a lot lower, but also in the root of your song, which kind of like just makes life easier when you're sort of keying it all together. And it sounds like this. So we have a transient, we have a punch, and then we have a tail. So how do we make them? You can synthesize them in Serum, well, any synth with like sort of envelope controls that you sort of draw in. And I used to do that. I used to use Faceplant sort of more so to do that. And then more recently, or say in the last sort of half a year or so, I use a plugin called Kick Drum, which is this. And the reason why I like to use this plugin is I can visually see the waveform on every tweak that I do. So if I'm changing the envelope, the frequency, I can see what's going on. I mean, you can see that in like stuff like Kick Free, all the other sort of plugins, but this one I find is way more precise and has some extra little features that I like. So, starts off like so, not the kick that we want. So, essentially, all a kick drum is a sine wave going from very high to very low in a very short amount of time. Like that. If we exaggerate this, it's that. If we put this on 1/4, so then obviously this is 1 full beat, and then it becomes obviously the shorter zappy sound. So what I'll do is I'll quickly sort of tweak this and make, so like we're going to go from very high to sort of like your 2K, and this will create like a click. And this is essentially going to be like our transient that I was sort of saying on this part here. And then our punch is sort of going to be around this point here, and then we want obviously our tail to sort of finish around, like our key of our tail, sorry, to finish around here. So we'll go in F. If you click this dial here, then obviously it pitch locks things to the exact sort of key. So if we go F1, and then we're going to move this one to F1 as well, boom, and we have this. So a little closer to the example that I showed you earlier. And then the more we sort of tweak this part here, our punch changes. So we need that punch, that sort of transition, because if we don't, and we have like, if we go to the note that we're going to here, we're just going to have this like very short sort of transient, and it's just going to go straight to like the tail, and then it doesn't have that thump that hits you in the chest, you know, so it's all like click and rumble, but no click, thump and rumble. So we're going to move this like so. Then we've got the envelope section here, and then we have an EQ section. The reason why this is cool is because obviously as we move the EQ, in real time we're seeing what's happening to the kick. So if we boost up like some of the top end, we can see obviously that this transient here is obviously going to be affected by that. And then it's got like an auto volume thing set here so that it kind of like holds it all down for you. So if we take up the tops, we're getting in real time the changes and we can hear what we're doing. As a kind of like rule of thumb, on like the frequency spectrum of a kick drum, if we open up the EQ, when you're playing a kick, this sort of section here around sort of 250, 300 is usually like this sort of like woody, knocky noise. So if we like boost this, obviously it's clipping at the moment, 2 secs. It just creates this sort of like mid-rangey knock that doesn't sound too good on the ear, like to me anyway. So you're normally trying to get rid of this, or not get rid of it, but turn it down. And if you turn it down too much, then obviously you go back to the point where I was saying that, you need that sort of frequency, sort of that thump around here, and it sounds too clicky and hollow, so it's just literally transient and tail. Right, so we have this sort of dipping around like a 250, 300. If we turn it up, feels a little bit cleaner. Then our envelope's here, so this is our volume envelope. So if we turn this up, what's going to happen here is we can see like the frequency of where we're at. So at this point here, there's a lot of like 300. So this is why it's going to be dipped down. There we go. So this is our kick drum. It's a bit long because we're going like a full quarter. So we can shorten this. I recommend we shorten it because naturally your bass is probably going to come in this sort of second half here. So we're going to drop it down. That's our frequency down 1. And that's pretty much it, sort of like shaped up. Bar some sort of tweaks here. Well, I think that should be right for now. So what we have here is more essentially like it's a very short kick, and the reason being is I kind of like gel. Well, more recently I'll be sort of making a punch that's more sort of hit you in the chest. That sort of gets out of the way and then gets straight into like the tail and the sub of like a bass, and it kind of like morphs all into one. Sort of like the hardstyle kicks where they have like that sort of transient, but I'm trying to add a bit more punch that fits in with the hardcore stuff, but then also the power and weight that you can get from having like a longer tail and like that sort of distorted, crunchy bob tail. So we have a kick. What we can do is drag this wave out, and this is what we've made. So let me just move that over here. So this is our kick. Don't worry about it being perfectly sort of cut off the 1/8 part, because on the next section I'll show you how we'll adjust that in real time and you will be golden. So the next plugin I'm going to bring up is a thing called Kick Ninja. My good friend Clubfiller actually put me onto this. Face value, it's just another sort of kick generator with sine wave. You can sort of move the pitch, and you can make kicks just like we did in the Audiger. I think it's called Audiger. It's called that, right? I ain't going to pronounce that, but that's what it's called. Back on track. We have Kick Ninja, and what I noticed you could do on this is build things up by the harmonics. So what the clip art, so you have, right, I'll break it down quickly, right? So you have pitch, where we draw the pitch in just like any other one. You have amplitude. You have a distortion built in here, but you have this thing here called blend, right? So all the way to the left, it's going to use the wavetable, which you can select source, square, triangle, and what we want. If it's on 0, at 12 o'clock, it's just a sine wave. And then if we go all the way to the right, we're using these 4 harmonic dials here. And the reason this is good is we can actually make bass with this and then gel everything together with our kick in real time, where all the phases are locked in, and then it doesn't matter what key I press, everything sounds exactly the same as I intend it to when I've made it in one key, or where I'm playing in an F or C, do you know what I mean, or G or whatever. And how we do that is, so we build up the first harmonic. So with no harmonics on, we get no sound. First harmonic of a sine. We have that sort of traditional sort of pitchy, sort of pitch down kick. And then back to the harmonics. And what we can do is with these envelopes here, we can move them. So we can say, right, I want more volume on the first harmonic to come up over time like this. Then we can go to our second harmonic, and we can add that as well. And we can change what's happening. So what I will do now is I'm going to make a bass out of this instead of making a kick, which seems a bit opposite to what this probably plugin was designed for. But here's a way that I found that I use it in my workflow. So we have that. Add the second harmonic. And then we add a third harmonic. Probably turn that down. And then we have the fourth harmonic. And then as we can see, like the waveform's changing as we add things. And then the cool thing is we can distort this. So if we draw in the envelope where there's, so to sort of recap is there will be a kick drum here. And then what we're mainly listening for is what happens at this point here. So this with distortion. And then so I'll do this a little bit more. So we have that. Right, now going back to the pitch, the special part about this plugin is this sort of node here where, say we're in, well, F, like, so we made our punch in F, and what we can do is right click this and say pitch track, and nothing will happen until you hit this button here. And now, let's drop this down 2 octaves, 2 seconds. We have pitching in real time. So how I would then use this is I would drag in my kick that we made in kick drum. No, don't cut it. And drag this in onto one of the samplers. So now we have a kick and a bass. And obviously this isn't going to follow the key unless we have this on, which we don't want. And we can see on the waveform here, if we take off the main one, let's turn them all off, right? So this is the oscillator waveform. This sampler 2 is the kick waveform. So what we can do now is quickly go back to the amplitude, and we're going to sort of essentially sidechain this out. So that's how you'd make your offbeat. And then we can also like shorten the kick of the sample, like so. So that's why I say don't worry about it being like a little bit over 1/8. But what I want for this one is like the punch and the tower to sort of gel together. And how we're going to do that is sort of let them bleed over. So what we're going to focus on is on this main. If we put it on main, we can see what's happening with both of the samples. So we have like a bit of interference here where we can adjust in real time. Go back to the amplitude. And we're trying to make this sort of smooth out. There we go. So it's a bit more uniform. And we can go back to distortion, add some more crunch. And then how we're going to get that sort of crunch exaggerated is we'll use white noise. So I've left like sampler 1.3 to literally go down to here, add noise, go to white noise. And at the moment that's going to be loud, turn the gain down. And then as we turn it up, we can see we're adding the noise there, change the amplitude because I don't want the noise to be appearing here. And we're going to layer this noise like so, and we can see what's happening to these little peaks here. And at the moment, doesn't sound too special. It just sounds like white noise layered over the top. But over here, we have an effects section, and we can distort stuff. So if we turn distortion, we'll go to hard clip. And again, like everything, we have these envelopes where we can choose how much distortion is happening at what point in the sort of like playthrough. So naturally, if I turn like the wet all the way up, or most of the way up, and turn the amount, we're distorting the kick as well. And in some cases, that's what you want. Most cases, for me, it's not. So if we turn... So what we can do is say like, right, we want to distort like the very start of the transient. And then we want the distortion to sort of kick in more as the tail's sort of happening. So I hope this sort of makes sense and I'm explaining this properly. But and as we push this and then sort of bleed in the noise, you'll see what's happening with the sound of the tail. Without the noise. With. So yeah, that's essentially what I'm doing. And it will be a long process of me go back and forth, changing like the amplitude of the tail there, where I change the pitch then of the kick that I've just made and sort of maybe adjust like the tail so it pitches down a little bit. And then it's just a case of trial and error until I get that sort of sound that I want. But the main thing is, it's knowing that every tweak I do, the phase is the same per key, and there's going to be no sort of like bummed out notes at the tops or like inconsistencies, which you don't want. You want like a uniform sound. So if I'm playing it at F and it sounds good, I want it to sound good when I'm playing it up in like D or something like that, or at least the same sort of sound. Do you know what I mean? So I'm just going to have less bass playing at a high key. That's just how music works. So from there, what I'll do is I'll load up. Here's one I made earlier, as I say. There we go for that one for now. So what we could do now is we have like our sort of punch and our tail done. It doesn't sound quite as polished as it can be yet, so a bit further more processing will happen. What I tend to do is add some multi-band compression. Instead of like banging on some OTT like I tend to do with everything else, I'm using Oxy OTT, which is essentially OTT, a bit more advanced and a few more features in that I like. But the main one is this linear phase, which means at these points here, where the frequency splits are, we're not going to get some sort of like weird sort of smears and that on the phase, and which is more important when you're dealing with like your low end than it is more the top end. Meaning is more noticeable with like those sort of phase smears on your lows, especially if it's a fundamental part of your track like the kick and bass. You want things to be as tight and clinical as possible. So I'm going to open up one of my handy dandy presets. Feel free to copy that if you like. And essentially squashing it, but we have the linear phase on, but I'm also clipping it. So everything's kind of like brick walling in. So if I drag in, here we go. See how things sort of flattened off? And that sort of works for our headroom. We can push then sort of like we can juggle the, you know, how much lows do we have? How much tops? And then we're sort of driving. So as we push this without the linear phase, so let's exaggerate it. So press F and then like an upper E with linear phase on. Everything sounds as it's meant to. Yeah, it's tighter, better, and it's what you want. So yeah, that is essentially just my process for doing kick drums and basses. I mean, it used to be a case of, you know, just loading the sample in. All the hardcore people understand like the 185 kick days. For me, it's just like so limiting, and as the longer I've done this, I feel like I need to be more in control of what's happening. And this then scales down to a lot of things, like on something so clinical like your kick and bass, it changes everything. It's your foundations of your track, essentially. And if something's quite wrong down there, it makes everything like for the mix and the mastering process an absolute nightmare. And so yeah, you have more control. It's not quite as simple, you know, just to go and make your kick, make your bass, bang it all together, chuck some Oxy OTT on, and there's other processes I will use and etc. But this one I'm using at the moment. But it's just nice to have that control. It's nice for everything to be pretty much in the tin as well. So what happens is, imagine on the writing process, I have this sound, and as I'm working on my song, if the chord progression changes on my melody, I don't have to then sort of go back into the audio, chop everything up, and then repitch all the tails and sort of juggle everything, line all the phases up, and it's a time saver. So, you know, starting this, you know, it's not easy. I struggle. Like for me, kicks were probably the hardest thing. Kick and bass was the hardest thing I found to sort of get to a comfortable standard where I can be more consistent and quicker with it as well. But knowing that and having that in your arsenal changes the game for your time and everything. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So so what I thought we could do as well at the end of these videos is have like a quick, like, you know, 2 or 3 question, like sort of question answer. So feel free to like bang some questions in the comments, and then I'll try and pick the question that sort of best suits what would benefit, I'd imagine, most people, and then answer that, and then we'll go from there. And yeah, also shout out to everyone that bought the Serum 2-pack Hard Essentials that I put out last month. Had some great feedback from it. I'm glad everyone's enjoying it and it sort of helped people out with their productions. And yeah, I hope this sort of helps you with your kicking bases, because I know this was like a section that I really struggled with for me. Transitioning from that like grabber sample from the Vengeance kick at a bass, I feel like it's got a lot more advanced nowadays with how that's sort of working and how we're sort of building it as producers. And that's my way. So yeah, bang your questions in and hope this works, and I hope you have a good one. So that is the end of the session. Ta-da!